Today, I want to tell a story from the point of view of someone who could have witnessed some of the events surrounding the birth of Jesus. It's not somebody who's in the Bible, but someone who could have been there. Once upon a time, I was a servant to one of the great lords who traveled from the east to Bethlehem of Judea. Oh, I know, you never heard anything about me, but did you think such wealthy and privileged men would travel without a caravan of comforts, of tents and cushions, food and servants to care for everything? Of course not. There were many of us who went with them. It was still a difficult journey for the Magi, especially the older one. Sitting on a camel every day isn't as comfortable for old bones as a cushion in your own home. Not that he ever complained. Once in a while he might say something about his aches, but it was always with a smile. He refused to let his age slow down his companions. We servants knew little about the reasons of the journey. We heard rumors about following a star to find a king, but we were more interested in getting our duties done than in matters belonging only to these lordly astronomers. You can't expect a woman to get excited about such things when she has walked for hours upon hours and still must prepare a meal when she is done. After that, I only wanted to sleep, sparing but a few minutes to think of my family so far away. You see, I had 3 little ones who I had to leave behind with my mother. If there'd been any other way, I never would have left them. What is a woman to do? My husband was gone, and we are not a wealthy family. It's hard to survive when you're poor. But everything was going well until this journey. I'd secured a position serving in the home of a great man. My wages were decent, and I could see my family every day. Then my lord decided to follow a star. It was so hard to leave my children. It might be a year, even 2 or 3, before I would see them again. I admit I was bitter about the whole affair. It wasn't that I hated being a servant. I'd always been poor, and I certainly had plenty of company in my poverty. But it was hard knowing that my family and my life rested in the whims of the wealthy. Follow a star? What star? I could see nothing. Well, of course, I didn't enjoy being a servant. It wasn't that the lords were mean-tempered or even ungenerous. It was just that they so clearly knew they were the lords, that they were the privileged ones. They would not abuse a camel or a table, and they never abused us. They cared nothing for our desires and our hopes. We were objects of use and nothing more. It was a relief to arrive in Jerusalem. It was a city, and there were many advantages there. But the Magi were puzzled because apparently the star they had seen did not lead them as precisely as they wished. The king they were searching for was to be found somewhere in that land of Israel, but where? I never heard the story exactly, but some said that King Herod was troubled by the rumors roused by the Lord's questions. I know he met with them, and I know they seemed to distrust him, although he did give them the information they sought. And it is also true that there were terrible rumors that reached us on the homeward journey. We heard of soldiers and mothers who wept until they cried with no tears left. When I heard those rumors, my heart ached, for I thought of my own children so unprotected on this earth, and I thought of another child as well. At the time, we knew nothing of this. We servants only knew that we would be moving on to the village of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is a small town in the Judean countryside. It hardly seemed like the birthplace of a king. Strange things had happened there. Along the way, we met a shepherd. He was leaning on his staff and gazing upward, as though seeing things apart from the sky or the clouds. On his face was a glow, almost a radiance, and now and then he would murmur something. Once I saw tears in his eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow or of pain, and he seemed completely unaware of the great caravan that was passing him by. The steward spoke to him, for he wished to ask directions, but he could not raise the man's attention. Only when his arm was shaken and the steward spoke sharply did the shepherd seem to see us. And then, unlike others that we had passed in our travels, he was quite unimpressed by the richness and splendor of the lords and their caravan. Politely he asked, could he serve us in some way? The old lord bent down and asked about a king in Bethlehem. And radiance crossed the shepherd's face until it seemed almost indecent to see such naked joy. He is in Bethlehem, the man said. 12 nights ago we saw him. He was lying in a manger out in the barn. A barn? Exclaimed the young lord. The shepherd smiled. There was no room for them in the inn. But a king born in a barn? And the young lord shook his head with disapproval at the way Judean matters were handled. I don't think he objected to the barn, the man said, and we shepherds were welcomed in the place. As poor and as ragged as we are, we knelt and were brushed by the wings of angels. Oh, I don't think he minded at all. How strange, I thought to myself. Everything seems turned upside down, inside out. Kings born in stables and shepherds who have the bearing of nobility. I don't know the details of what happened that night in Bethlehem. I know the lords were said to have found the baby and laid their treasures before him. That was enough for me to know. It meant that we would be turning toward home now. I was excited. I couldn't sleep. I spent most of the night getting ready. And then in the dark hours before daybreak, there was a stirring in the inn. A young couple came into the courtyard. Even in the dim light, I could see that the man looked worried and anxious. Wait, he whispered to the woman before entering the stable. When I came closer, I could see that the bundle she held was in the form of a small child. May I see? I whispered, lifting my oil lamp. She pulled back the wrappings, and the light fell upon his tiny features. He was very young, and such dear little hands were clasped on the rough blanket. Well, how can I tell you about him? He looked like most new babies, but there was something more as well. I wanted to grab him up and hold him to my heart. In that moment, I think I would have died for him. When I put out my hand, he took hold of my finger, and I felt both a joy and a grief so piercing that I started to cry. Wait, I also told the woman, and turned to grope in my small bag of belongings. Deep in the bottom was a robe which my 3 children had worn as infants. I had carried all this way as a remembrance of them. Here, I told the woman, it is not much, but it was made with love. 3 babes have worn it, but it will last for a 4th. The woman received it as though it was a rich and costly offering. I thank you, she said. It's so soft. He will find it quite comforting. And suddenly I knelt before them. I hardly knew why, a truth perhaps that my heart knew, though my mind did not. And then the man was there, a donkey readied for his wife to sit upon. It was barely a moment, and then they were gone, moving urgently into the night. I took a deep breath and turned my face to the sky. There it was! Well, how could I have missed it before, that star gleaming in the darkness? We started the homeward journey, and my steps grew light. I was anxious to return to my family, and yet a strange part of my heart lingered behind, as I would have liked to have seen that little boy grow and become a man. But perhaps my steps were lighter for more than one reason. You see, the attitudes of the Lord seemed to have changed. They appeared to regard us servants more as people rather than as conveniences. Oh, maybe that was only my imagination. Perhaps it was I who had changed. Perhaps it was not that they looked down on me any the less. Perhaps it was because I felt lifted up. I had looked up to the Magi. I had compared their lofty state with my lowly self, and I had felt bitter over their power and my helplessness. I had felt small and unimportant and unvalued. Now I had knelt before someone far greater than they. Now I had looked to the stars. I had looked up so high and to such greatness, and I had become dizzy. And the strange thing was, it didn't make me feel small or unimportant at all. I had looked to something far higher, and it made me tall as well. Amen.